Okay, I haven't timed this talk. I'm going to, I hope it's about right, but if anything, I'll try and speed it up a bit so we can get to lunch. So, just a quick intro. Made Media, we were founded in 2002. We have about 30 people, and we're specialists in e-commerce sites for large cultural institutions. So basically, we build websites for big concert venues, museums, that kind of thing. And we've got offices in Birmingham, UK, which is where I'm from, and London and New York. So we do quite a lot of SilverStripe work for clients in the States as well as in Europe. And we've been using SilverStripe since 2012, and we've been a professional partner since 2017. I guess we've always been doing our own thing on the fringes with SilverStripe, and we're keen to get more involved with the SilverStripe community. Our clients are quite niche. So when we're pitching for websites, we tend to find that we're coming up against the same competitors all the time, and we're, you know, SilverStripe is part of that pitch. So when we're trying to win new work, it comes down to a huge number of factors: expertise, track record, creativity, capacity and compliance, you know, whether that's accessibility or PCI compliance, all those kinds of things. But often in the pitch somewhere, there's the question of the CMS. So hopefully the client hasn't picked the CMS and then brought us in. They're at least interested in our recommendations. And traditionally, this is how we've always done the positioning of that CMS. So here are some factors that you might like in a CMS. Episerver is a .NET CMS. It could stand in for Kentico or one of the other big .NET CMSs that sometimes clients like. So, you know, they're definitely enterprisey. That's what some of our clients like. They're well structured. I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt on that. I don't really know. They're built in .NET. They're probably all object orientated and well structured. Reasonably well structured, fair enough. This is one we come up against quite a lot. It's enterprisey, it's open source. We all like open source. I'm not going to give that one the benefit of the doubt in terms of being well structured. This is SilverStripe, so this is what we're pushing. So the way we come in is we've got 3 ticks in the boxes. This is the only CMS that's got all 3 ticks. So it's enterprisey, and it's well structured, and it's open source. So it's clearly the winner, job done, no more problems. But increasingly, there's another outlier in the mix that you just wouldn't expect to be there, which is WordPress. Because WordPress, it's not enterprisey, it's not well structured, it is open source, and it's got one key factor over all of these, which is that it's also wildly popular. Because apparently WordPress powers 27% of the internet. And often when we're pitching, this is what it used to look like when we were talking to people about what a CMS should do. This is what people were asking for. They're probably asking for .NET, because they didn't have a lot of imagination. They're asking for permissions, control, workflows, integration with APIs, ability to enforce structure. This is an IT department's wish list for a CMS. But increasingly what we're coming up against is a wish list that looks a bit more like this. Flexible, drag and drop, no rigid templates. We meet a lot of people who are very anti the idea that they're entering data in a rigid template structure. Personalization, anti-structure. So this is a little bit of an issue because we position the CMS we like. Probably many of us are here in this room because we like SilverStripe, because it's very well structured. But clients hate structure. Clients just want to do what they can do, and they want everything to be easy and drag and drop. So that's the context, and that's why we started looking at Gutenberg. So does anyone know what Gutenberg is in the context of WordPress? Okay. So it's a WordPress plugin. It's the new what you see is what you get editor for WordPress. and it's all about drag and drop blocks of content. So we're moving beyond kind of a visual representation of an HTML editor into drag and drop blocks. It's a lot like Squarespace and Wix. So what you can see with WordPress is they're getting competition from these new visual build your own website kind of platforms, and they're becoming more like that. So it replaces TinyMCE in WordPress 5, and it's going to take over 80% of the WordPress UI. So what that means is WordPress as we know it is going to look completely different because it's going to be driven by this whole drag and drop blocks editor. And here's a little demo of it. This is just captured straight off the website, some GIFs. You can see that this is very appealing, right, to a user. Okay. So in a way, I think this is an inevitable transition because direct manipulation always wins in user interface. So if you think of Photoshop, we could all write PostScript in a text editor, but no one's going to do that. They use a visual editor, and ultimately, that's where software always goes. So this is what editing websites is going to look like. Actually, within the WordPress community, it's really controversial, which is interesting, because it breaks the existing themes. It breaks old content. If you go and edit one of your old pages, it will break it. It gets in the way of bloggers who just want to write, who haven't noticed that blogging isn't a thing anymore. It's a real paradigm shift for WordPress. And I think that's interesting because, the WordPress we know today is going to be completely different. So why are we interested? We're not really interested in WordPress. So why are we interested in this? First reason, Made hates traditional what you see is what you get editors. I can't remember what the standard SilverStripe one is, but we've never used it. We swapped it out for markdown fields because they all, it doesn't matter how good they are, they always mess things up a bit. Or clients have trouble with cutting and pasting formatting and stuff like that. But we're running out of steam with markdown. So at the moment, we just have markdown blocks, and we have a nice visual representation of the markdown, but we're getting to the end of being able to convince clients that that's an acceptable editing solution. And we want to neutralize those head-to-head CMS demos. So if we're going into a demo and the person who's going to be using the CMS is one of the people sitting in the room, we don't want them saying, oh, look at this new thing that WordPress does. This is so much more what we're looking for. We want to neutralize that demo. And SilverStripe's moving towards a block paradigm anyway. I know that was, a large part of the content of the conference last year. And also, another feature that we're often asked about relates to personalization. And personalization often relates to, I want to show this person this block, but this person that block. So again, it's another way to hook in some of that thinking. And also, it looked like an upgrade on Sir Trevor. So we started looking at these drag and drop block editor type things a couple of years ago. We had this one in mind. It's by an agency, no relation, made by many in the UK. They're very good, and they built this for ITV, who are one of the broadcast networks in the UK. This is a nice little solution. We were looking at integrating this, but it doesn't seem to have gone anywhere really since it was built. So let's just have a quick look at how Gutenberg works. So now I'm going to start to get a little bit developer-y. I don't actually code anymore, not for work anyway. But I'll try my best to explain some of the developer-y stuff. So for a kickoff, it's in React. What isn't? But at least that means it's not yet another JavaScript framework that we have to learn. You define the blocks. So there are a bunch of standard blocks, things like paragraphs, lists, images, but we're going to want to define our own, so you need to do that within React. And this is just a sort of simplified representation of what one of those blocks looks like. So you've got a schema that describes, the things that go into that piece of content. You've got an inspector view, and that kind of, you've got like a right-hand properties panel, that lets you manipulate some of the features of the content block, and this allows you to lay out what's in there and what you're going to edit. And then you have an editor view, which is how should that block look in the editor as someone's editing that block. So you're controlling all those things in this single class. So basically, you define a bunch of blocks like this, and then you put it in, and you've got your drag and drop visual editor. But how do we port it to SilverStripe? Well, we're working with SilverStripe 4. React's already in there. I kind of know what we're like, so I was fully expecting to find we'd somehow managed to instantiate React twice, once, there in the UI, but then we'd also done it again for the editor or something. Happily, that's not the case. It's all integrated. We looked at Gutenberg on GitHub. I guess, unsurprisingly, it's incredibly tied into WordPress. It presumes all kinds of WordPressy things are going to be there. So we stepped back to an earlier version, standalone Gutenberg, which I think was created primarily for the purpose of just demoing the editor. So it's not maintained as much, but it was a much cleaner code base for us to start working with. And then we started looking at some more complex SilverStripe integrated blocks. So that little model I showed you earlier was just for a simple paragraph block, but we want to do stuff that integrates with SilverStripe. So we might want an image gallery that integrates with the media manager in SilverStripe, for example, as a block. So here's one of those. So yeah, there are lots of hooks into SilverStripe here. There's hooks into the database. There's hooks into the UI of SilverStripe because we need to hook into the media picker. There's quite a lot of integration that needs to happen to do a block like this. And so here's a little diagram of how that works, like what the components are and how they work. So in SilverStripe, you've got an HTML field that represents this piece of content. That'll be the entire sort of rich text block, if you like. In Gutenberg, you have a render function which defines how it's going to look in the editor. You edit the content, it saves the HTML. There's a render function that defines how that HTML is going to get saved back to the field. And then over on the SilverStripe side, back on the server, we pass that HTML to grab some of the content out of it, because that HTML, it might contain some IDs and things that we need to hook into that relate to SilverStripe data objects or whatever. So we can hook in the related objects and modules in SilverStripe. So here we're all in SilverStripe code. And then we push that through a template. So each of the Gutenberg blocks has an equivalent SilverStripe template for rendering that block. And then you get the HTML pushed out to the front end. Hiran, the lead developer who worked on this, shared me some of the code. I don't think you're going to get anything from these screens. It just proves the code is there. But you can take a look at this on GitHub later. So here, yeah, we're looking at the Gutenberg block being defined here. This is just an example. That little image picker, there were several different blocks where we wanted to use that image picker, so it got turned into a component for React, so that it was reusable across the different blocks. Here we're looking at, I think, at the renderer on the SilverStripe side, which takes the block and tries to grab any information out that it needs to do the template rendering. And here we're looking at the SilverStripe template. There's some work to do to bridge JavaScript UIs. So for example, you've already got JavaScript going on with pop-up windows for media managers and things like that. So Gutenberg's got its idea about how that works. SilverStripe's got its idea. We had to try and bridge those UIs. I don't understand what the next things I'm going to say to you mean, but this is how we did it. We use Webpack. I think someone's talking about Webpack shortly. We use that to create an alias to the image picker and point directly at the React component. I don't know what that means. I kind of get the idea. I think it means we inject some stuff. It feels dirty. We output the field in a format that SilverStripe expects, and then we trigger entwine. I think entwine is how SilverStripe updates its DOM of what's going on in the UI. And we use a mutation observer to see changes in the image selector because on-change events don't work. So I think these examples are sort of specific to that image picker integration. That's how it works. If you've got any questions about that, don't ask me. So I showed you that basic architecture. I know I'm mostly talking to developers here, and probably some of you can recognize the classic developer pattern that this is. Has anyone got any ideas? It's the batshit crazy pattern. What would be a lot cleaner would be something like this. So you'd be storing your content not as HTML, but as a piece of structured JSON. You'd be rendering it to HTML with some function, might live on the client, might live on the server, somewhere in between. React, you can do stuff with React where you can run some of it server-side, which is an interesting thing to look at. So you'd just have one render function. You'd be editing the JSON, and that render would be updating in real time. And then when it's time for SilverStripe to generate the page, it would just use the same render function, so you've got one view, so you're only having to define that template in one place. So ideally, that's what it would look like, but there are a couple of problems with that. One is, Gutenberg doesn't store content as JSON. It does a bizarre thing where it actually just manipulates the HTML in real time and tries to encode it and decode it to get alternative HTML views for an editor or for storage. So that's an issue. Another issue is that you don't necessarily want the piece of content to be rendered exactly the same in the editor as it is when it's actually presented to the end user. So for example, that image gallery component might have tons of JavaScript in it and interactions and all those sorts of things, and you might not want them actually getting in the way of the user when they're trying to edit the content. So you might actually want different edit representations and view representations anyway. So I think it could be better, but maybe there's always going to need to be alternative renderings for the editor and the template. But never mind the batshit, here's the demo. Because really what we were looking for was the ability to do a head-to-head demo that looked good to an end user. And here it is. So starting off with some simple text. Okay, when we're adding this link, these pages are SilverStripe pages auto-completing. So, embedding a YouTube video. You see the representation in the editor isn't a perfect match for the representation over in the preview window. So that's one of the things that we're working on is how close can we get and what's the best way to structure things for that. So here we're doing a cast and creative list, and here we're referencing a bunch of SilverStripe data objects because cast and creative are, proper related objects in the SilverStripe schema. So here the widget's being embedded, but these properties over on the right-hand side are controlling that, and that's getting rendered from data objects. So yeah, that's where that data is actually coming from. It's coming from this tab. Okay, and there's a whole bunch of blocks here that I haven't shown. I've just shown a couple to give a feel for the easier editing and the more complex integrations. So mission accomplished, because I think that's quite a compelling video to be able to show some of our clients in terms of how they can edit the website experience. And really, that's what we set out to do. I mean, this is going into production next week on a couple of websites, but we've really achieved what we set out to do there. If there's any technical debt, FutureMade will deal with the technical debt. Those guys are such suckers. We throw them stuff to deal with all the time, and they always manage to sort it out. Where are we going with it? It needs refining. So refinement in terms of matching up styles, polish, all that sort of stuff, that's what we're working on. It needs stability. We need to do a little refactoring to make sure it's as stable as we can make it. And then in terms of features, we want to look at adding on personalization. So from our point of view, one of the things we quite often want to do is control maybe the ordering of those blocks, or whether a block displays or not might relate to what marketeers call a segment, which might relate to who we think the current user is and what we think is the important content on that page for them. How does this compete with the content blocks module? So obviously SilverStripe are working to adopt a formal approach to content blocks, which I know was a key theme of last year's conference. We think blocks are the future. We think it's inevitable that people are going to start to want to look at their websites in that kind of way. The content blocks module obviously has much better structure. So we've built this editor. It makes for a great user experience, but we're not very happy with the way it's structured under the hood. Content blocks module looks very well structured and well considered. Gutenberg does feel more immediate and interactive. So it's probably got more of that feel that users are looking for ultimately. So what we're thinking is maybe we can start to make some efforts to hook that Gutenberg front end up to the content blocks data objects. So what we'll be interested in exploring is whether we can refactor how the rendering and saving actually happens so that it hooks into underlying data objects that are based around content blocks. It's the start of a journey. If you want to get involved, if you want to download what we've done because you think you might find it helpful for one of your projects, or you want to take a look, or you want to make some suggestions or feedback, you can find our work on GitHub. The address is there. I'm going to save and share these slides so anyone can take a look. And that's it from me, unless anyone's got any questions.
Any questions for Jake?
How difficult would it be to create extra blocks, or are you stuck with the ones from Gutenberg? How does that work?
Yeah, so no, I can't tell you exactly how it's structured because I'm not a dev, but the way it works is that effectively we've got configurations on a per site basis, so that you've got a set of core blocks, but they can be overridden and you can add additional custom blocks on a site-by-site basis. So how that works within the file structure of SilverStripe, etc., I can't exactly tell you, but if you look on GitHub, it will become apparent how those things are laid out. So we've built it as a module, and the idea is that the blocks are overridable and extendable. So from the point of view of our work, we tend to work with quite similar clients who are looking for quite similar content types, and I'm sure there'll be a library of fairly standard ones that we use, but I would expect them to get customized and extended for every site that we put into process. So the process will end up being a little less templating and a little more block design and configuration for each site that we do.
So did I get this right, that currently you store the entire page then in one big HTML field?
So what we've done is we see the Gutenberg area as effectively a replacement for what would have previously been a single rich text editor field. So, in the example of a page that I showed you, there's quite a lot of structure around that in addition to the core content. But when it comes to that core content area where it's like for the client to sell their show, it's like, yes, over to you, use these blocks, use it as you want. And from a SilverStripe perspective, that's a single HTML field. But I think going forward, we'd probably like it to be finer grained and more similar to how the content blocks module works.
You based your work on the existing Gutenberg or a previous version. Is this still going to be updated, or how do you keep up to date with Gutenberg updates?
So we started with a version which is the it was a standalone version, which I think WordPress was effectively using for demo purposes. And the official Gutenberg plugin has moved ahead. It's been maintained and gone beyond that. We have made quite a few efforts to not fork the code. So if we are overriding quite a lot of things rather than actually forking the code. So theoretically, we should be able to merge back in, and it should be possible to update. But I think that's a broader question as to because they are finding and fixing issues in Gutenberg. But I think there's a broader question as to whether ultimately we would want to try and maintain compatibility with it, or we would just fork it to make it work, play better with SilverStripe. It's an open question.
Any more questions? No? Let's give a hand to Jake. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much.